If you are heading off to church this morning, here is something for you to think about. Many Christians believe strongly in tithing. That's giving, oftentimes, at least 10% of your income to the church. But a new survey says a majority of evangelical leaders believe that tithing is not required by the Bible. The survey was conducted by the National Association of Evangelicals and among its 100-member board of directors. And you see here that 58% believe tithing is not required. 42% believe the Bible does require church members to do so. You can imagine this survey created a bit of a stir. So joining us this morning, Leith Anderson, who's president of the National Association of Evangelicals. There he is. He's with the group that conducted that survey. He's also senior pastor of Wooddale Church. That's in Minnesota. Sir, good morning to you. And also joining us, Brian Kluth. He's also a pastor and strong believer in tithing. He's also written a best-selling book, A 40-Day Spiritual Journey to a More Generous Life. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here. Mr. Anderson, let me start with you. What does the Bible say about tithing?
Well, in the Old Testament, tithing was frequent and it was popular. It was actually required. But in the New Testament, there really isn't much of any mention at all about tithing. And it's the New Testament that is the primary giving guide for modern-day Christians.
So it sounds like if we go by that, then tithing necessarily is not required by the Bible. Am I hearing you correctly?
Well, the key word there is required. Actually, 95% of those that responded to our survey said that they at least tithe. They give 10% or more. So they do tithe, even though they think that it's not a requirement.
All right, let's put up for our viewers here a particular scripture. This one comes from Malachi. I'm going to read it here as I get ready to come to you here, Mr. Kluth. And it says, "Will a man rob God? Yet you have robbed me. But you say, in what way have we robbed you? In tithes and offerings." Now, you are a strong believer, Mr. Kluth, in tithing. So how much would you say should one give to the church?
Well, the reality for me is I've just discovered that in our society, giving has been going down for 40 years. And so I just think we're at a time when people need to be called to giving 10% or more of their income to God's work. And I believe that's the church and ministries, charities, and the needy.
All right. And I guess a lot of people say 10%. But can people give of the church and tithe in ways that aren't monetary? Does it also count if you give of your time in some way?
Well, the reality is we're supposed to be giving our time, our talent, our treasure, but I don't really think that you can separate out the whole idea of giving to God and not do it financially. People do give their time, and that's so important. But when they don't give of their income and their finances and their financial blessings, I think they miss out, and I think they are missing what God would really have for them.
Now, Mr. Anderson, let me bring you back in, because a lot of people do this, and forgive me for saying it this way, but they do it religiously. They really do tithe, and they think the way that Mr. Kluth just described, that they are missing out on something from God, or they're not doing what's required of them, quite frankly, by law that's in the Bible. What would you say to someone heading to church this morning, besides making their own personal choice? But some people might, frankly, be fearful that they are missing out on some blessings from God if they don't do what they believe Mr. Kluth has told them they should do.
Well, I would say for those that tithe and are going to tithe the church today, good for you. That's just great. The New Testament in 2 Corinthians says that we should give as we have been blessed. So we've been blessed a lot. And, I'm absolutely convinced that in many cases we should give far more than 10%. I know a friend who decided early in marriage that he would increase his family's giving 1% per year, and they've been married now for 30 years. So way beyond any 10%. That's really great. But it's out of delight and joy and generosity and gratitude to God who gave to us first.
Well, Mr. Kluth, let me ask you as well, because we have seen, and I've read in reading up on this, some people out there say that they always give to God first, at the first of the month, and then they deal with the bills at the house the rest of the month. Do you believe it's okay, or would you even recommend or say, you know what, it's just part of the deal, that even if it means a hardship in your house or your family, you should still tithe and give to church and to God first?
Well, a lot of people don't give because they think they're going to have less. They think, I don't have enough. If I give, I'll have less. but I believe giving is God's crazy math. And when we learn to be givers, we experience more of God's wisdom, more of God's guidance, more of God's direction, more of God's provisions in our life. So when I first began to give 10%, I was scared to death. I had a shaking hand when I wrote that first check, but I decided, God, you know what, this doesn't make sense to me. I have more month than I have money. But God, I'm going to begin to honor you with what you've given me. And over the years, I've increased and give far beyond that. But what a joy to learn that practice and to see God work in your life.
Well, one last thing to you, and people have this question. This is an honest question people have. Is that 10% before or after taxes, Mr. Kluth?
The question is gross or net. When I started, I was too scared to do it off the gross, so I started off the net. I then grew it past the gross, and then I grew it past the financial blessings in my life, and now I give on a six-figure. I give 6 figures, and I live on 5. And so the idea is to excel in the grace and the joy of giving. What a thrill in a person's life giving can be.
Well, Mr. Anderson, last thing to you here. You certainly hear Mr. Kluth. It sounds like he certainly gives a lot to the church, but for folks who are having a real spiritual and religious debate within them about this, what would your advice be to them this morning? And also, do you think with the New Testament and just over time, we might see tithing start to fade?
Well, let's encourage tithing and especially encourage generosity, but don't steal from grandpa's prescription fund in order to give 10% to the church. Sometimes there are emergencies and situations that take a priority, like providing for your family. But stick with that guideline. Try to be generous, and 10% is a good guideline, but it's not a legal requirement of the New Testament.
All right, gentlemen, this is a really interesting topic and debate, and we all know some people who certainly want to give and do give to the church, but many stick to that 10%, like I said, religiously. But Mr. Anderson, Mr. Kluth, I appreciate you all spending some time with us on what I know are always busy Sundays for you guys, but you all enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thanks so much.
Hey, thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you, TJ.
Isn't that something? Faces of Faith. This is the only segment I get where somebody actually says, God bless you at the end of it. I love it. Well, if you want to explore more about your faith or other faiths, you can go to CNN's Belief blog at cnn.com/belief. Well, can you believe